God is still on the throne, and prayer changes things. This is Brother Hutchings inviting the listeners to another Watchman on the Wall program of Southwest Radio Ministries. And here now is Brother Jerry.
On today's program, we're honored to have the author of a must-read book entitled The Amateur join us. Brother Hutchings will be speaking with Edward Klein about his best-selling book. Mr. Klein is author of numerous New York Times bestsellers, a former foreign editor of Newsweek, former editor-in-chief of the New York Times Magazine, and a contributing editor of Vanity Fair. Now, here are Brother Hutchings and Edward Klein.
Thank you, Brother Jerry. Mr. Klein, I admire you for tackling this subject. I know we've had several unusual and unlikely president, and I think I would put Mr. Obama, our present president, in that category. But I think our audience today would like to know more about Mr. Obama, his background, his spiritual associations, moral convictions, and just who this gentleman is.
Well, thank you again for having me on your radio show. I appreciate it very much. As you probably recall, I did a 3-hour interview with the Reverend Jeremiah Wright, who was for 23 years Barack Obama's minister at the Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago. And I sat down with the Reverend Jeremiah Wright with a tape recorder and taped the entire 3-hour interview. During that interview, he told me a number of very interesting and I thought very important things. The first thing I think that your audience should know is that Jeremiah Wright said that when Barack Obama first came to him back in the 1980s, he was, to use Jeremiah Wright's words, steeped in Islam. That because he had spent his childhood in Indonesia, which is the most populous Muslim country in the world, he knew a lot about Islam. His stepfather was a Muslim, his stepsister was a Muslim, all his friends were Muslims. He had attended Muslim churches, and he knew very little, said the Reverend Jeremiah Wright, about Christianity. And so the Reverend Wright said that he offered to bring Barack Obama to an understanding of Jesus Christ. And I asked the Reverend Wright, I said, are you saying that you converted Barack Obama from Islam to Christianity? And his answer was very interesting. He said, that's hard to say. In other words, he did not deny that he did that. He then went on to say that as far as Barack Obama and Michelle Obama are concerned, church is not very important to them. These are not church people. These were his words, not mine. These are not church people, the Obamas. They don't attend church very frequently, and they don't even send their children to Sunday school. But that Obama's connection to the Trinity United Church of Christ was essentially political, because that church had 8,000 members at that time, and many of those members were well-off African-American people who had both financial and political connections in the Chicago area and could be of value to Barack Obama in his career. So that was the first thing he told me. The second thing he told me, the Reverend Jeremiah Wright, was that during the 2008 campaign, when he, Jeremiah Wright, became an embarrassment to the Obama campaign because of all these videotapes of him railing and ranting against America and white people and Jews and Israel, that he received an email from Barack Obama's best friend, Eric Whitaker. And Eric Whitaker offered him $150,000 if he would remain silent during the rest of the campaign. In other words, a bribe. Jeremiah Wright said he refused that, and then 2 or 3 weeks later he got a call from Barack Obama himself. And Obama said he'd like to meet with him in a secure location, meaning secretly. And Jeremiah Wright said, well, you don't need to do that. You've been to my home hundreds of times. You know where I live. You can come over here. And so Barack Obama got into a Secret Service SUV and was driven over to the parsonage of Trinity United Church of Christ, where he met for an hour, secretly, really, with Jeremiah Wright, begging him not to continue making these incendiary comments about America, white people, Jews, and Israel. And Jeremiah Wright said, I'm sorry, I can't shut up. My principles don't allow it. And Barack Obama, according to Jeremiah Wright, said, the trouble with you, Rev, he called him Rev, the trouble with you, Rev, is that you've got to tell the truth. And Jeremiah Wright said, well, that's not such a bad problem for a minister to have. Maybe you should have the same problem.
Yes, I remember during the campaign, Reverend Wright continued to make anti-American or U.S. declarations from the pulpit, and then Mr. Obama separated himself from Mr. Wright and the church, as I remember.
That's right.
As far as I know, they did not renew any kind of association.
Well, that's correct. Jeremiah Wright told me that he sent a letter of congratulations to Obama after he won the presidency, saying, congratulations on achieving your ambition. And he doesn't know if he ever got that note because they haven't had anything to do with each other ever since. Now, this is a man, Jeremiah Wright, who not only delivered those terrible sermons from the pulpit. People keep thinking that, well, you know, Barack Obama sat in that church and listened to this stuff, so therefore he's sort of been infected. But in fact, it's far worse than that, because Barack Obama actually met personally outside of the sanctuary in Jeremiah Wright's living room hundreds of times, as Jeremiah Wright told me, with the minister at every stage of his career. And I talk about this in my book, The Amateur. I talk about how Jeremiah Wright guided, mentored, and directed Barack Obama from his earliest days in Chicago, and how Jeremiah Wright is the apostle of black liberation theology, which is based on the idea that there is an oppressor class, white people, and an oppressed class, black people, and that given Marxist ideas that there has to be a redistribution of wealth and power in this country. And as we have seen, now that Obama is president, he believes in the redistribution of wealth. He's talked about spreading the wealth around. He's talked about you didn't build this if you're successful. He clearly has following that trajectory ever since he became president.
I have been to a number of communist countries or post-communist countries like Russia, Cuba, Mongolia, China, many, many times, and seen the effects of communism and the anti-Christian philosophy of communism. Do you believe Mr. Obama has more of that communist philosophy in his administration carried out? He recently said about taking more money from the rich so the lower and middle class won't have to pay more taxes. Well, you can do that, and you can take all the money from the rich and big corporations, but in a year from now, you'd have 50 million people out of work. But under communist countries, more and more people look to the government, depend on the government, until it's a 100%. That's one thing that worries me about the Obama administration.
Well, you know, I agree with you entirely about that. It certainly appears as though Barack Obama is trying to move us toward a more European-style socialist state in which more and more people depend on the government for their subsistence. And we see this in many different ways. For instance, today, some 48 or 49% of the American public don't even pay taxes. 51% pay taxes and 49 don't. What does that mean? That means that the 49% that don't pay taxes have no incentive to cut back on government spending because, after all, that's where they get their livelihood from government largesse, from handouts. So we're becoming more and more an entitlement state, which explains to a certain degree, in my view, why today, given the economic mess that we're in, there aren't more people who are ready to vote against Barack Obama. And the reason they're not ready to vote against him is because their interests are to continue this entitlement state, this dependency, this big government takeover of our economy. And that worries me a great deal, as it does you, because it's a direction that leads to a collapse of this country as we know it.
As I remember, something like 45 million Americans get food stamps. And, of course, that's at direct taxpayer expense. And bringing more and more people to be responsible to the government. In Russia, you know, they would have the children pray to God for a cookie, and then they'd raise up no cookie. And then they'd say, pray to Stalin for a cookie, and they'd slip by and put a cookie on the desk. See, Mr. Stalin provides more for you than God does. And that's basically the theory of communism, as I understand it, where all the people are responsible to the government.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So, yes, I'd say that's the reason I wrote this book, The Amateur, Barack Obama in the White House. And the reason I think it's an important book that people ought to get and read and discuss and pass around is that it raises your understanding of where he would like to take this country and why we need to stop this from happening. It's a kind of a basic understanding of who this man is and why we need to stop him.
It seems to me that he may have more affinities towards Islam than toward the basic Christian fundamental faith.
Well, he certainly has shown a lack of compassion and empathy and understanding for Israel, that's for sure. And this is of interest not only to American Jews, as you know, but to many evangelical Christians as well. This is, after all, the Holy Land. Jerusalem is the heart and soul of biblical Israel. And Barack Obama has shown a definite prejudice, I would say, against Israel's position and in favor of the Palestinian position. I think he is of the opinion that if only Israel would give away everything that the Palestinians are asking for, then peace would come to the Middle East. We know that that's not true, that in fact Israel isn't even acknowledged, its existence isn't acknowledged by many Arab countries, including the Palestinians, and that Israel's very existence is being called into question by Iran and its headlong rush to become a nuclear power. So once again we see an attitude on the part of the Obama administration, which I go into, by the way, I have a very long chapter about, in this book, The Amateur, about Barack Obama and Israel, which I think would be of tremendous interest to your listeners.
It seems to me that Mr. Obama in the White House has done more to weaken the structure of the family unit than any other president. At least that's my observation. Why?
Well, I honestly wonder that question myself. Clearly, I think he sees a political advantage to coming out in favor of marriage between the same sex, because when he did that, he suddenly received tens of millions of dollars in donations from the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community, as they're called. What is it? LGBT community, which has a lot of money, and the people who are sympathetic to that point of view. So I think it is a calculated political move on his part to come out in favor of something in order to not only gain votes, but to gain donations to his campaign. I don't think he cares to understand the majority of Americans are not in favor of what is called so-called gay marriage. We see that in votes in various states in which the states have come out in favor of marriage being between one man and one woman. We see it now in this controversy over Chick-fil-A, in which the CEO of that company, Chick-fil-A, who is a very religious man, closes his stores on Sunday and is in favor of traditional marriage. We see that with certain big city mayors who are saying they don't want those stores to open in their own cities because they're not in favor of somebody speaking his mind. And what happened is there's been a big backlash, and millions of people have turned out at those stores to show their solidarity with the owner of Chick-fil-A and his right to freedom of speech. So I think that you have a president who's out of sync with the social values of this country.
Well, I'm more like a Kentucky Fried Chicken person myself, but I certainly appreciate the statement of Chick-fil-A. I know their stores here in Oklahoma City was crowded. People were lined up for blocks, so just to express their opinions, really. You say in your book, I believe, that Michelle Obama and Valerie Jarrett are really the powers in the White House. Who is Valerie Jarrett, and could you tell us a little more about why you said that?
I'd be more than delighted. Valerie Jarrett comes from a well-off African-American family. She was raised in Iran and speaks Farsi, which is the native language in Iran. She's very pro-Iranian, pro-Jordanian, pro-Palestinian. She worked in Chicago for Mayor Daley as his deputy chief of staff, and she was known as the black face of the Daley administration. And she hired Michelle Obama as an assistant way back when. And thanks to Valerie Jarrett, the Obamas, who were not well off and didn't know many people, were introduced through Valerie Jarrett to the power structures in Chicago and Illinois, including the African-American power structure, the Daley power structure, the Jewish American fundraising power structure. And it was through Valerie Jarrett that the Obamas were able to launch Barack Obama's political career, because he had that kind of backing, and Valerie Jarrett became their political godmother and has been, in their view, the person who protects them, who guides them, who they can count on, who they trust above all others. And when he became president, Valerie Jarrett went to the White House and was given the job of being senior advisor to both the First Lady and to the President of the United States. An unprecedented power position. And she was even more powerful, and has been more powerful, than Rahm Emanuel, who was chief of staff, or Bill Daley, who was chief of staff. She has advised the President and First Lady to take an ideological, left-wing ideological stance on almost everything. It was she who introduced him to Solindra, the solar green green energy company that went bankrupt and cost the country $528 million. It was she who sent Barack Obama to Copenhagen to lobby on behalf of the Chicago Olympics in 2016, which didn't work and was a terrible embarrassment to the president. It was she who argued in favor of Obamacare over Rahm Emanuel, who wanted the president to do health care in small increments, not all in one big gulp. And it was she who, for many, many months, argued against Obama sending the Navy SEALs into Pakistan to get Osama bin Laden because she was afraid if it failed, it would hurt his political career. So she was putting his career ahead of our security. There's no way to exaggerate the power that this woman has and the power that she has exercised trying to keep Obama away from any kind of compromise with Congress and ideologically on the left wing. I think if the election were held today, I would have to say that I think Barack Obama might win. But a lot can happen. The thing that concerns me a great deal is that I feel that the Obama campaign team in Chicago, that they're a tough bunch of very smart guys, but we have to wait and see. And I think based on the economy, which is certainly not getting better and only getting worse, then I think he has a real chance of beating Obama in November.
Well, thank you, Mr. Klein, for being with us today. I, again, would encourage our listenership to consider getting this tremendous book, The Amateur. Thank you, sir, for being with us.
It's my honor and pleasure to be with you today. Thank you so much.
Today, Brother Hutchings and Dr. Larry Spargimino pick up on information found in Edward Klein's book, The Amateur, that you heard about from him yesterday. One of the chapters in the blockbuster book is about the U.S. relationship to Israel under the current regime in Washington. And it's one of several topics Brother Hutchings and Brother Larry will discuss. Here now's Brother Hutchings.
Thank you, Brother Jerry. You know, in election years, especially presidential election years, here at the ministry, we get so many letters and calls asking for advice on whom to vote for president. Of course, that's always a difficult question for us because we are limited in our comments concerning anything related to political considerations. However, in the current election, I think there are many things that we can approach on a biblical basis or Christian basis. And, of course, that is the stand that black pastors have on certain issues in relation to white pastors. The family, has the family been made stronger, or what has happened to the family during the President administration, and what is the views of the President administration or the Republican candidate about the family. And there are also many other issues like Israel. For example, what is the stand of the President in regard to Israel as opposed to the opposition? Dr. Spargimino, you know, there's an important book that I reviewed the author of the book. It's called The Amateurs. The author of the book is quite credible. But let's start with Israel, for example. Did the author of The Amateur have anything related to Obama's position on Israel as opposed to our traditional position?
Well, yes, Edward Klein, who is the author of this book, he is a New York Times best-selling author. Actually, he's had numerous books that he's written have been on the New York Times list, but he's got a chapter, Dr. Hutchings, called The Jewish Problem with Obama. And one of the things that I love about this chapter, you know, a lot of things have happened over the last 4 years, in Mr. Obama's relationship with Israel, some of the things that he's done, some of the things that he said. But this book neatly organizes all of them so that if somebody wants a quick review, if you're saying, well, let's see, for whom should I vote? And you want to know factual information about what's happened. This book is especially useful for that person. Now, it seems that the real Jewish problem with the president can be traced back to his first full day on the job. And I think that's really significant. What does a president do? If you had been elected president, if I had been elected president, what will we do on our first day? Well, on January the 21st, 2009, President Obama summoned his national security team to the Oval Office, and he laid out a tough new policy toward Israel. Mr. Obama said that in order to make good on his campaign promise to extricate 200,000 American troops from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the U.S. had to create a new position regarding Israel. We had to develop a new approach to the Jewish nation, and he said that the only way to produce peace in the Middle East is to begin to back away from our traditional defensive position of the Jewish state. Now, in the book, there's a transcript of a conversation between Abe Foxman, who is the Anti-Defamation League's leader and president, and Abe Foxman said this to Mr. Obama. He said, "But the perception is that you're beating up only on Israel and not on the Arabs. If you want Israel to take risk for peace, the best way is to make Israel feel that its staunch friend America is behind it." Now listen to what Mr. Obama said. Quote, "You're absolutely wrong," the president replied. "For the past 8 years under the Bush administration, Israel had a friend in the United States, and it didn't make peace." And I think that's very significant because it shows the new stance that our nation has taken under Mr. Obama. And then Mr. Foxman had a conversation with Edward Klein, who is the author of the book, and he said this: "Unlike other administrations, this one is applying linkage in the Middle East. It is saying that if you resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Messiah will come and the lions will lie down with the lambs. All the president's advisors on the Middle East, starting with George Mitchell, believe in this linkage, and they're telling the president that you have to prove to the Arab Muslim world that you are different than previous American presidents." So this is very, very revealing, I think. The real issue is Mr. Obama making good on his campaign promise to bring peace to the Middle East. How's he going to do that? Well, by backing away from Israel and strengthening our ties with the Arab nations.
Yes, indeed. And we know that concerning the family unit are moral issues related to a strong family unit. Mr. Obama, the first month in office, stated that homosexuals were the best people we had in the nation for public service, and he changed June from Month of the Brides to Gay Pride Month. Also, we know that his issue on marriage between homosexuals in opposition to the traditional marriage of a man and a woman, anytime you favor the same-sex marriages, you are helping to destroy the family unit. I don't care what anyone says about it. I think that's the obvious result. But Mr. Obama has taken a strong pro-gay pride position. He has taken away government protection of DOMA, the civil and legal institution of marriage. We know that even though white pastors may be divided on this, I notice that the black pastors are 70% against. So there are more black pastors against the same-sex marriage proposal of the present administration than white pastors. But I think most pastors would agree that the status of the family under the present generation in regard to legal definitions has definitely declined. Does the author of the book have anything to say on that?
Well, he points out some of the suits that are now taking place in our country. In one issue where there is a lesbian partner to a woman who has now gotten out of that lesbian relationship. She's become a Christian. She does have a little daughter. Her name is Isabella. But because of the attacks on the family, because of the attacks on traditional marriage, there has been a court, Dr. Hutchings, that has awarded this lesbian unsupervised visit rights to the child. Now, the lesbian has no biological relationship to the child whatsoever. Now, there's been a pastor who has arranged to have this mother and child gotten out of this country because the child was actually showing the ill effects of being with this lesbian. In fact, some of what was going on there I won't say on the radio or on the air. So what has happened now, these lesbian groups have become so emboldened that now there's been a suit against the pastor and also against Liberty University because this pastor has some affiliations with Liberty University. So, they seem to be getting a little more bolder and bolder and bolder and bolder. And at one point, we were saying, wow, don't ask, don't tell. Repealing that is a very, very sad and very serious business. Well, now we see that some of those who are in the gay and lesbian community are actually on parade in military parades in various cities. So you're absolutely right. This is only, emboldening this attack on the traditional family. It's kind of like, the camel gets his head in the tent. Pretty soon the whole camel is in the tent.
There is a movie, I understand it's quite a popular movie now coming out. It's titled 2016. I think it relates to what the country would be like in 2016 if President Obama is elected for another term. I understand that this movie is not too complimentary about his position.
No, it's not. It's entitled 2016 Obama's America. It has dramatically boosted the number of theaters showing it. This film is now the second biggest moneymaker per theater behind The Expendables 2, which is the nation's #1 flick. It opened last month in just a single Texas theater, and even though there are so many complaints from the president's supporters, it just grew and grew and grew and is slated to be in 800 theaters in a short time. Now listen to this. Obama's America is based on the conservative author Dinesh D'Souza's book, The Roots of Obama's Rage. Now, Dinesh D'Souza is a very popular conservative author, and it suggests that the president wants to downsize the influence of the United States. That's kind of the whole theme behind the movie. The producer, John Sullivan, said that it is popular because, quote, people are looking for a different narrative on Obama than they are getting from the mainstream media, close quotes. And he added that the movie isn't just doing well in conservative markets. He said that the highest grossing showings, listen to this, have been in Manhattan and Los Angeles. And so the timing of the movie's expansion and popularity isn't good for the president, though critics have suggested that it is preaching to those already opposed to Obama. But nevertheless, there are a lot of people who are seeing it. Last weekend, the movie earned $1,249,000. It was a 293% surge over the previous 2 weeks. So a lot of people are interested in this, and of course we know Dinesh D'Souza is a very reputable commentator, and he has brought out some things that I think everyone should be concerned about.
Yes. Now, the book that has been written about Mr. Obama concerning his past and his position on many issues, he indicates that Mr. Obama and Mrs. Obama weren't actually a strong church family. What else does the author of the book have about the issue of his religious experience and his life as a supposed Christian?
Well, the author points out, and he's got some really great quotes that really show that Mr. Obama and Mrs. Obama's connection with church in Chicago was really for, what should we say, political advantage because it gave him a good platform. And of course, we know that Jeremiah Wright, the pastor there, was really a liberation theologian, to say the least. He was pushing kind of theology that we don't find in the Bible, but we find in the minds and hearts of those who support Che Guevara. And what's very interesting, as you pointed out a moment ago, that there are many, many black pastors who are very unhappy with Mr. Obama, because you and I well know many black Christians. They're fine, solid people. They love the Bible. They love Israel. They love the home. They love the family. I can think of the African Americans that I know, and we've had many of them on tours to Israel, and a couple of years ago, we took a tour to the Canadian Rockies. We just had such a wonderful, wonderful time with black Christians, and now they're saying, now, wait a second, something is just not right. Now, I also thought it's very interesting that in the book, Dr. Hutchings, there's a big section not only on Mr. Obama and pastors, but also Mr. Obama and black businessmen. You would think, well, what are the black businessmen saying about him? Well, the author says, I spoke with Harry C. Alford, the president and CEO of the National Black Chamber of Commerce, which represents the nearly 2 million black businesses in the United States. Quote, when Obama became president, we were all happy about the symbolism. America's first black president, Alford told me. We didn't really care about his position or views on anything. We just wanted a black president no matter what. We should have been more careful, listen to this, as his views on small business, especially black business, are counter to ours. Now, this is the CEO of the National Black Chamber of Commerce speaking, and he goes on to say how so many of the black businesses have good, credible, even biblical, sound financial principles, and they go by these principles, and yet they recognize the fact that the principles of business and finance and frugality and hard work are really not being evidenced by Mr. Obama. So it's not just black pastors, it's also black businessmen who have great objection to what is happening in the White House.
The Republican candidate for president in this coming election, of course, is well known as a member of the Mormon Church. We cannot endorse the Mormon theology, can we? Of course, it's difficult to also endorse Mr. Obama's position on the family, on homosexuality, and many other issues, which are certainly contrary to, we believe, to what the Bible teaches. But do we just decide to vote for on moral issues and political issues?
Well, Dr. Hutchings, I agree with you wholeheartedly that we certainly don't embrace Mormon theology in any sense. It's not just a little off. It's not like the difference between a Baptist and a Presbyterian or a Pentecostal, where there may be some fringe differences, but where the core doctrines are the same. That's not true of Mormonism. The core doctrines are very different. Even the very view of who God is, who Jesus Christ is so radically different that I can honestly say it's certainly not Christian. And I know I'm going to make a lot of people angry, but, we have to go by the Scriptures. A Christian is described by the Word of God, by the Holy Bible. However, after saying that, I will point out that when we elect someone to be president, we're not electing a pastor. We're not electing a Sunday school teacher. I think the real question is, can the person whom we vote for support the United States Constitution? That's the real issue. And I think all of our listeners have to realize that, if they don't vote at all, that is really voting for the wrong person. So the issue is not religion. The issue really is, will we continue to be able to have the freedoms that are so important for us to be able to have this program, for us to have a Christian ministry? And I think that's very important for people to consider those issues. Will the candidates keep the airwaves open? Will they give all religious groups freedom to preach their truth and their doctrine, or will the airwaves be closed down? That is really the issue that I'm concerned about.
Certainly, we would encourage our listenership to pray and seek God's will in the coming election. I know many, including Dr. Towns, has written a book on fasting for 40 days before the election and praying and making it a serious matter, seeking God's will.
Well, that is such a good little booklet. It's going to be so helpful, so useful to our listeners because, this really is a matter, I believe, of spiritual warfare, to look at these monumental issues that are staring us in the face. And the Bible tells us that the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. And this is really an issue of prayer, an issue of fasting, an issue of seeking the Lord's will and just surrendering ourselves completely to Almighty God.
Yes, Christians, the Pilgrims, first settled this nation, and this has always been a basic, strong Christian nation. Of course, anyone can come to this country and worship their own particular God. They can be a Buddhist, a Muslim, whatever, and we have many of people of other faiths in this country, but this is still a basic Christian nation. It was Christians who wrote our Constitution. Regardless of what others say, our founding fathers were Christians. And the indication is that they believed that our Constitution would be of value only if this nation remained Christian. But now we have views contrary to that, and we wonder where we're going now with all this.
Well, Dr. Hutchings, if we don't have a turnaround, and the only kind of turnaround that will really amount to anything is a true revival from the Holy Spirit, it will be downhill. And I think the author of the film 2016, has really pointed out some things that are very, very important for us to think about. We need to preserve and to maintain our freedoms. Government did not give us these freedoms. God did, but it's the job of government to help us to maintain these freedoms, and I believe that's really what has made America great, and yet we have no infallible guarantee. God always warns, God always exhorts, God calls for revival and repentance and renewal.
Mr. Obama has said, I think on several occasions, as I read in the press, that this is no longer a Christian nation. Now, we don't know if that's observation or from conviction. Does he not want this to be a Christian nation? Does he want it to be a complete secular nation? We have some concerns about it. If this becomes a secular nation, then according to our forefathers, our Constitution will not work. Our Constitution will only be of value if we maintain Christian ideals and teachings. There's a lot to consider in this next election. Now, the book, The Amateur, I think it's one of the most frank and open discussions of the issues involved in this coming election. I know you have been reading the book, Dr. Spargimino. Does he take any definitive position?
Well, I think what the author does, Edward Klein, and I respect him for what he does, is just repeat and report factual information. And I think that's really all that can be expected, because so many times the media doesn't present the facts. If the facts don't accord with its predetermined position, then they won't report it. But at least the book is very factual, and it allows the reader to make up their own minds. And that's really our desire. We don't want to tell anybody how to vote, how to think, what to do, but at least look at the facts. And then if you have the facts, you can make the right decision.
Thank you, Dr. Spargimino, for providing a review, additional remarks concerning the book, The Amateur. I think it would be helpful if somebody is undecided about the issues in the coming election, of course, both moral and constitutional. Here now is Brother Jerry to tell you how you can get a copy. And until the next regular program, God bless you each and every one.
Thanks, Brother Hutchings. Friends, if you haven't already called, written, or gone to our website for a copy of The Amateur, be sure to do that right now. The book's been called one of the most important of its kind that's been published this year. There's another out there also entitled The Amateur, but it's not the one you heard about on the last two programs. The subtitle of Edward Klein's book will help you know that you have the right one. That subtitle is Barack Obama in the White House. The 277-page hardback is available as our gift and appreciation of your $30 contribution in the United States, $35 for those of you in Canada. To get your copy, call 1-800-652-1144. Write to Southwest Radio Ministries, Post Office Box 100, Bethany, Oklahoma 73008. The Internet web address is swrc.com. Next up on most of these stations is today's Bible in the News report. Be here tomorrow when Brother Hutchings talks with nutritionist Dr. Arnold Susser about keeping your body hydrated. It's on your Watchman on the Wall program of Southwest Radio Ministries.